January 7, 1945. London, England, number 10 Downing Street. Prime Minister Winston Churchill sits at his desk in the Cabinet War Rooms reviewing notes for the afternoon's parliamentary session. Papers are scattered across the mahogany surface. Casualty reports from the Ardennes, supply manifests, diplomatic cables. Outside, winter rain streaks the windows. Churchill reaches for his cigar, takes a long draw, and studies a map of Belgium where red pins mark the slowly receding German Bulge. The door opens. General Hastings Ismay, Churchill's military secretary, enters without knocking. That alone tells Churchill something is wrong. Ismay is holding a sheaf of American newspapers in one hand and a telegram transcript in the other. His face is tight. "Prime Minister," Ismay says, his voice carefully controlled, "Montgomery has given a press conference." Churchill looks up from the map, and Ismay sets the newspapers on the desk. Churchill sees the headlines even before reading them. The New York Times: British general claims credit for American battle. The Chicago Tribune: Montgomery says British saved disorganized U.S. forces at Bulge. Churchill's hand stops halfway to his mouth, cigar forgotten. He picks up the first paper, reads, sets it down, picks up the second. His jaw tightens with each sentence. "When?" Churchill asks quietly. "This morning, January 7th, at his tactical headquarters. He called in the press corps, British and American correspondents." Churchill lifts the telegram transcript. It's Montgomery's actual statement, transcribed by Chef Communications. He reads aloud, his voice flat, "The battle has been most interesting. As soon as I saw what was happening, I took certain steps to ensure that if the Germans got to the Meuse, they would certainly not get over that river. The American troops have fought very bravely, but they were in some disarray." Churchill sets down the paper. The silence stretches. Then, quietly, with the kind of cold fury that his staff has learned to fear more than shouting, "What the devil has Monty done?" Ismay clears his throat. General Eisenhower's chief of staff called it a calculated insult to American forces. General Bradley is threatening to resign. Chef is in crisis. The Americans are calling for Montgomery's immediate relief from any command over their forces. Churchill stands abruptly, walks to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Rain runs down the glass. Beyond, London goes about its war, damaged but defiant, tired but enduring. He thinks about the Americans fighting in Belgium. The boys from Kansas and Texas and New York who are bleeding in the snow. 70 to 7,000 casualties in 3 weeks. And Montgomery just told the world they needed British forces to save them. "Ismay," Churchill says without turning, "tell me Montgomery didn't actually say the Americans were in disarray until he arrived." "I'm afraid he did, Prime Minister. He told reporters the Americans were scattered, communications broken, leadership confused, that British forces steadied the situation, that he personally coordinated the defense and organized the counterattack." Churchill turns from the window. Does he understand what he's done? Does he have any conception of what this does to the alliance? Ismay says nothing. There's nothing to say. They both know the answer. Churchill picks up the telegram again, reading Montgomery's exact words. "I employed the whole available power of the British group of armies, brought the British troops into the battle, headed off the enemy, and finally, put in a hard blow." "How many British divisions were engaged?" Churchill asks. "2, sir, in the northern sector, under Montgomery's coordination. And American divisions? Approximately 30. 1st Army, 9th Army, holding the shoulder, 3rd Army driving the relief. All American." Churchill sets down the telegram carefully, as if it might explode. So Montgomery commanded 2 British divisions and approximately 30 American divisions, and he's claiming British forces saved the battle? That appears to be the thrust of his statement. Yes, sir. Good God. If you're here for the untold stories of World War II, the moments when alliances nearly shattered, when pride collided with survival, when leaders had to choose between loyalty and truth, then subscribe to Elite War Files. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us whether you think Montgomery was right or reckless. Now, let's get into this. Churchill returns to his desk and sits heavily. He pulls the casualty reports from the pile and reads them again, though he's memorized the numbers. 1st Army, 41,000 casualties. 3rd Army, losses in the relief drive. 9th Army, holding positions under constant attack. British forces at the Bulge, 1,400 casualties. 1,400 British, 77,000 American. And Montgomery just claimed the British saved the Americans. Churchill looks at Ismay. What's the reaction in Washington? Ismay opens a folder. Secretary of War Stimson has received complaints from 17 senators. General Marshall is demanding a full report from Eisenhower. The American press is unified in outrage. Even papers that usually support British leadership are calling Montgomery's statement unconscionable. And our own press? Split. Some papers are defending Montgomery. Others are worried about alliance fracture. Churchill stands again, pacing now. Get me the casualty numbers. Exact numbers, American and British. Every division engaged. I want to know precisely who fought where and who bled how much. Yes, sir. And get me a secure line to General Eisenhower. I need to know how bad this is at Chef. Ismay nods and moves toward the communications room. Churchill calls after him. Ismay, one more thing. Get me the transcript of every statement Montgomery has made about the Bulge. Every cable, every report, every communication with Bradley or Eisenhower. I need to understand what he was thinking. After Ismay leaves, Churchill stands alone in his office. He walks to the map and studies the Ardennes. The Bulge is retreating now, German forces pulling back under Allied pressure. The battle is won. American forces held when everyone thought they'd break. Patton's relief of Bastogne is already becoming legend. The 101st Airborne's defense of that crossroads town is the stuff of history books. And Bernard Montgomery, who coordinated the northern sector with competence but not brilliance, has just told the world that British forces saved disorganized Americans. Churchill knows Montgomery, has known him since North Africa. Brilliant tactician, meticulous planner, utterly incapable of sharing credit. And now, with victory secured and the German offensive broken, Montgomery has decided the world needs to know that he, not Bradley, not Patton, not the American soldiers who bled in the snow, was the real architect of victory. But what Churchill doesn't know yet, what he's only beginning to suspect, is that Montgomery's press conference wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. Montgomery has been telling his staff for weeks that American leadership at the Bulge was amateurish, that Bradley panicked, that Eisenhower lost control, that only British intervention, meaning Montgomery's personal command, prevented disaster. Montgomery believed every word of what he told those reporters. He thought he was setting the historical record straight. He thought he was claiming credit Britain deserved. He didn't understand, or didn't care, that he'd just set a match to the greatest alliance in modern warfare. The secure line to Chef connects at 1400. Churchill takes the call in his private office, door closed, staff dismissed. Eisenhower's voice comes through clearly despite the static. Mr. Prime Minister. Eisenhower's tone is formal, cold. Churchill has heard that tone before, when Eisenhower is controlling rage. General Eisenhower. I've just read the transcript of Field Marshal Montgomery's press conference. I must know, how serious is this? There's a pause. Then Eisenhower speaks, each word measured. Prime Minister, General Bradley came to my headquarters at 0600 this morning and said if Montgomery isn't removed from command of American forces immediately, he will tender his resignation. General Patton said the same thing within the hour. Half my staff is ready to request transfers. Churchill closes his eyes. Surely it's not that, Mr. Prime Minister. Eisenhower's voice cuts through. Montgomery stood before reporters and suggested American forces were incompetent until British command saved them. He said this 3 weeks after American soldiers held Bastogne against impossible odds, after Patton's Third Army drove 160 miles through a blizzard to relieve them. After 70 to 7,000 American casualties stopped the largest German offensive of the war. Eisenhower pauses. Churchill hears him take a breath, controlling himself. Do you understand what that does to morale? To trust? I have American generals who fought alongside British forces for 3 years, who've defended British operational plans in Washington, who've maintained alliance unity through every disagreement, and now their field marshal is telling the world they're incompetent. Churchill grips the phone. General, what do you need from me? Honestly? Eisenhower's voice is blunt now. I need Montgomery to publicly retract his statements. I need him to acknowledge that American forces won this battle, or I need authorization to relieve him from any command of American troops. Because I cannot maintain this alliance if my field marshals are publicly insulting each other's armies. Give me 24 hours, Churchill says. I'll handle Montgomery, and I'll make a statement in Parliament. With respect, Mr. Prime Minister, Parliament can wait. Right now, I need you to make Montgomery understand that he's pushed this alliance to the breaking point. I will. You have my word. After the call ends, Churchill sits in silence. Then he picks up the phone again. Get me Field Marshal Brooke. Immediately. Within the hour, the British Chiefs of Staff are assembled in Churchill's office. Field Marshal Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, sits across from Churchill. Brooke's face is defensive before Churchill even speaks. Alan, Churchill begins, voice deceptively calm. I've just spoken with General Eisenhower. The Americans want Montgomery's head. Explain to me why I shouldn't give it to them, Brooke bristles. Prime Minister, Montgomery's account is accurate. American forces were in difficulty. First Army was split by the German advance. Bradley lost communications with his northern units. Montgomery coordinated the defensive response effectively. He stabilized the northern sector. He deserves recognition for that. Recognition? Churchill's voice rises. He claimed British forces saved Americans who were in disarray. while those Americans are still burying their dead. The Americans are overreacting, Brooke says stiffly. Montgomery spoke the truth. If they can't handle honest assessment, Churchill slams his hand on the desk. Papers scatter. Brooke goes silent. Allen, Churchill says, voice low and dangerous. I don't care if Montgomery personally stopped every German tank with his bare hands. You don't hold a press conference claiming you saved your allies while they're still counting their 77 casualties to your 1,400. It's not just tactless. It's not just politically stupid. It's suicidal to the alliance we need to finish this war. Brooke's jaw tightens. The field marshal was within his rights. The field marshal, Churchill interrupts, has made the Americans angrier at us than at the Germans. General Bradley, Omer Bradley, who's never said a critical word about British forces in 3 years, is threatening to resign. George Patton wants Montgomery court-martialed. And I have to stand in Parliament and explain why Britain's top general just insulted the forces that have bled beside us since North Africa. The room falls silent. Churchill lights a fresh cigar, hands steady despite his fury. Get Montgomery on the telephone, Churchill says finally. Now, tell him if he doesn't issue a clarification immediately. A real clarification, not some diplomatic doublespeak. I will personally relieve him of command and offer Eisenhower a British general who understands that alliance means not insulting your allies. Brooke stands. Prime Minister, the Field Marshal will not appreciate. I don't give a damn what he appreciates. Churchill's voice thunders. This alliance is more important than Bernard Montgomery's ego. This war is bigger than British pride, and if Montgomery can't understand that, then he's not fit to command Allied forces. Brooke leaves without saluting. The door closes with controlled force. Churchill stands alone, cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. Outside, rain continues to fall on a city that's endured 5 years of war. Inside, the man who's held this alliance together through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and Normandy realizes he's facing the worst crisis of command since America entered the war. And it's not from the Germans, it's from his own field marshal. What Churchill doesn't know, what he won't discover until later, is that Montgomery's staff is celebrating. At 21st Army Group headquarters, British officers are toasting Montgomery's press conference. They believe he's finally claimed proper credit for British contributions. They're tired of American headlines about Patton's relief of Bastogne, tired of American glory while British forces fight with equal courage. They don't understand that Montgomery hasn't claimed credit. He's claimed supremacy. And, in doing so, he's given every American general reason to demand his removal. The next 72 hours see the crisis escalate beyond anything Churchill anticipated. At Chef headquarters in Versailles, Eisenhower's staff is in open revolt. Bradley's resignation letter sits on Eisenhower's desk, unsigned but written. Patton is telling anyone who'll listen that he'll refuse orders from Montgomery. The American press has unified in fury. Even papers that usually criticize American military leadership are defending their forces against Montgomery's claims. January 8th. The New York Times editorial. Field Marshal Montgomery's suggestion that British forces saved disorganized American troops insults the memory of 19,000 American dead and dishonors the sacrifice of tens of thousands wounded. If this represents British gratitude for American blood shed in Europe's liberation, perhaps it's time to reconsider the Atlantic Alliance. The Chicago Tribune, never friendly to British command, goes further. Montgomery's arrogant claim reveals what many have suspected. British generals view American soldiers as incompetent colonials who need European guidance. General Eisenhower must choose British vanity or American honor. Even the Washington Post, typically supportive of alliance unity, runs a devastating editorial. The Battle of the Bulge was won by American soldiers under American command at American cost. Field Marshal Montgomery coordinated one sector competently. He did not save the battle. He did not rescue disorganized forces, and his claim to have done so is an insult that cannot stand unchallenged. At the Pentagon, George Marshall is fielding calls from 17 different senators, all demanding Montgomery's removal. Secretary of War Henry Stimson sends a private cable to Churchill. The political situation here is becoming untenable. If Montgomery remains in command of American forces, I cannot guarantee continued congressional support for European operations. Churchill orders Montgomery to issue a clarification. Montgomery complies with a statement that makes everything worse. January 9th. Montgomery's written statement to Bradley. Dear Brad, I am disturbed by reports that my press conference has been misinterpreted. I intended only to recognize the valor of American forces under my temporary command. If any offense was taken, I regret the misunderstanding. Bradley reads it in his office at 12th Army Group headquarters. His chief of staff watches as Bradley's face goes from white to red. When Bradley speaks, his voice is shaking with suppressed rage. He's apologizing for being misinterpreted? Bradley looks at his chief of staff. He's not sorry for what he said. He's sorry we didn't understand it was supposed to be a compliment. The chief of staff says nothing. There's nothing to say. Bradley picks up a pen and signs his resignation letter. Then he puts it in an envelope addressed to Eisenhower. He doesn't seal it yet, but it's ready. At Montgomery's headquarters, the field marshal's staff is confused by the American reaction. Montgomery himself seems genuinely baffled. He tells his chief of staff, Freddie de Gingand, "I spoke the truth. The Americans were in difficulty. I coordinated an effective response. Why are they so sensitive about acknowledging reality?" De Gingand, one of the few British officers who understands the political disaster unfolding, tries to explain. "Sir, perhaps it's not about the facts. Perhaps it's about how the facts are presented. The Americans lost 77,000 men. They're proud of their defense. And your statement suggested they needed British forces to save them." Montgomery's response is telling. If they needed us, and they did, then saying so isn't an insult. It's simply accurate. De Gingand realizes Montgomery genuinely doesn't understand. The field marshal believes he's stating objective facts. He doesn't grasp that claiming credit for someone else's victory, while they're still burying their dead, isn't about facts, it's about respect. And Montgomery's press conference showed none. Meanwhile, British Chief of the Imperial General Staff Alan Brooke is defending Montgomery in his private diary. "Monty is right, but tactically foolish. The Americans needed British intervention at the Bulge. Bradley lost control of his northern forces. Montgomery coordinated the defense effectively. But the Americans are too proud to admit they needed help. Instead, they throw tantrums and threaten resignations. Typical American overreaction." Brooke's diary entry reveals the fundamental disconnect. The British military establishment genuinely believes Montgomery's account is accurate. They don't understand why Americans are offended by what they see as simple statement of fact. But Churchill understands. Churchill has spent 5 years managing alliance politics. He knows that truth without diplomacy is just another form of arrogance. And arrogance, in wartime alliance, is a luxury no one can afford. January 10th. Eisenhower sends a coded message to Marshall in Washington. Montgomery situation critical. Bradley has written resignation letter. Patton refuses to operate under Montgomery's command. Request authorization to relieve Montgomery from any American command or reassign exclusively to British operations. Cannot maintain command unity otherwise. Marshall's reply comes within hours, decoded by Eisenhower's communications staff. "You have full authority to make command changes as you see fit, but understand political consequences with Churchill and British government. Recommend securing British agreement before acting unilaterally. Roosevelt stands behind you, whatever you decide." Eisenhower reads the message twice. Marshall has just given him a blank check. He can fire Montgomery if necessary. But Marshall is also warning him, firing Britain's most famous general could fracture the alliance beyond repair. Eisenhower makes a decision. He'll reassign American forces back to Bradley's exclusive command. Montgomery will command only British and Canadian forces. It's a de facto demotion, but it avoids the political explosion of actual relief. But he needs Churchill to fix the public relations disaster, and he needs it now. Churchill receives a visit from the American ambassador, John Winnet, on January 11th. Winnet doesn't mince words. "Prime Minister, I've received a call from President Roosevelt. He asked me to convey his personal concern about the Montgomery situation. The President wants to know, can you control your general, or should we proceed with command changes unilaterally?" Churchill stares at the ambassador. Roosevelt's message is clear. "Fix this, or America will fix it for you. Tell the President," Churchill says carefully, "that I will address Parliament on January 18th. I will clarify the British government's position regarding the Battle of the Bulge and Field Marshal Montgomery's statements." After Winnet leaves, Churchill sits alone. He has 1 week to craft a speech that will defend the American military record, acknowledge Montgomery's role without claiming credit, maintain British pride, preserve the alliance, and somehow avoid outright contradiction of his own field marshal while the entire British military establishment watches. It's impossible. But Churchill has built a career on achieving the impossible. But here's what neither Eisenhower nor Bradley knows yet. Churchill is about to do something unprecedented in British military history. He's going to publicly contradict his own field marshal in Parliament before the world press to save an alliance that's more important than any single commander's ego. And when he does, the words he chooses will define leadership for generations. January 18th, 1945. House of Commons, London. The parliamentary chamber is packed. Members of Parliament fill every bench. The gallery holds journalists from every major newspaper: British, American, Canadian, even neutral press from Sweden and Switzerland. Everyone knows what today's debate is really about. The official topic is conduct of the war. The real topic is whether Churchill will defend Montgomery or sacrifice him to preserve American alliance. Conservative MPs expect Churchill to defend Britain's military honor. Labour members are watching for any sign of weakness. The British military establishment is confident Churchill will stand by Montgomery. He's Britain's most successful general, the victor of El Alamein, the careful commander who's never lost a major battle. The American press corps in the gallery is skeptical. They expect diplomatic language, careful phrases that defend Montgomery while paying lip service to American sacrifice. They don't expect Churchill to actually side against his own field marshal. They're all wrong. Churchill rises at 1500 hours. The chamber falls silent. Churchill's presence fills the room. He always has that effect. Even his political enemies admit that when Churchill speaks, people listen. Mr. Speaker, Churchill begins, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, I have seen in the newspapers suggestions that the Anglo-American alliance has been strained by recent events in the Ardennes. I wish to address these suggestions directly and completely. Conservative MPs nod. Here it comes. Churchill's defense of Montgomery. The Battle of the Ardennes, Churchill says, and pauses for emphasis, was a great American victory. The chamber goes still. This is not the opening anyone expected. Make no mistake about that, Churchill continues. When the German offensive began on December 16th, it was American forces that bore the initial attack. American divisions on both shoulders of the penetration that held their ground against overwhelming force. American soldiers in Bastogne who refused surrender when surrounded. American commanders who organized the defense, and American reinforcements that drove the relief. An MP from the conservative benches interrupts, voice carrying across the chamber. What about Field Marshal Montgomery's coordination of the northern sector? Churchill turns to face the questioner. His expression is controlled, but those who know him see the anger beneath. I am coming to that. Field Marshal Montgomery assumed temporary coordination of American 1st and 9th Armies on December 20th. This was a tactical decision by General Eisenhower to simplify command in the northern sector. Montgomery commanded largely American forces, not 5 American divisions, for every British division in his sector. Churchill pauses, letting that sink in. 5-1. The ratio tells the story more clearly than any editorial. The men who held the northern shoulder of the Bulge were Americans. The men who defended St. Vith until it became untenable were Americans. The men who established defensive positions along the Meuse were Americans. Field Marshal Montgomery coordinated their deployment. But the fighting, the bleeding, the dying, that was done by American soldiers. Conservative MPs shift uncomfortably. Churchill isn't defending Montgomery, he's qualifying him. Another MP stands, this one from Labour. Prime Minister, Field Marshal Montgomery stated in his press conference that British forces steadied the American response. Are you contradicting his assessment? Churchill's eyes flash. And now he says the words that will echo through history. I have seen many accounts of this battle, Churchill says, voice rising. Some suggest British forces saved the Americans. I must tell this House that such a view is, he pauses. The chamber holds its breath. Grossly misleading. The silence that follows is absolute. Churchill has just publicly contradicted Montgomery in the strongest possible terms without actually calling him a liar. Grossly misleading is diplomatic language for wrong and offensive. Churchill continues, his voice now carrying the full weight of controlled fury. Let me give this House the facts. American casualties in the Battle of the Bulge, 70 to 7,000 men. British casualties, 1,400. When Bastogne was surrounded, it was the American 101st Airborne Division that held against 6 German divisions. When relief came, it was General Patton's Third Army. American forces, American tanks, American logistics, that broke through 160 miles in 48 hours. He pauses, looking around the chamber, making eye contact with MPs on both sides. When the German advance was stopped, it was American divisions on both shoulders that held the line. Field Marshal Montgomery coordinated the northern response. He did so ably and professionally. But let no one in this House, let no one in Britain, let no one anywhere in the world mistake who bore the weight of this battle. His voice rises to a level rarely heard even from Churchill. It was the Americans. The chamber erupts. Conservative MPs are stunned into silence. Labour members applaud. American journalists in the gallery are writing frantically. British military officers in attendance sit rigid, faces frozen. Churchill raises his hand for silence. The chamber gradually quiets. And any suggestion to the contrary, Churchill says, his voice now quiet but carrying perfect clarity, is not only factually wrong, it is grossly offensive to the men who fought and died there. An MP stands, trying to recover. Surely the Prime Minister acknowledges Field Marshal Montgomery's important role. I acknowledge, Churchill cuts him off, that Montgomery coordinated American forces in the northern sector with professional competence. I acknowledge that British troops fought with their customary courage. But I cannot allow anyone to claim that British forces saved American forces that were doing the vast majority of fighting and bearing the vast majority of casualties. He looks directly at the conservative benches, many of whom are Montgomery's strongest supporters. This alliance is not maintained by self-congratulation. It is not sustained by taking credit for others' sacrifices. We are fighting the greatest tyranny in human history. We are doing it together, British and American forces, side by side, bleeding together, dying together. His voice rises again, filling the chamber with controlled rage, and when American soldiers bleed for freedom, for our freedom as much as theirs, we do not belittle their sacrifice with boastful press conferences that claim British superiority. We do not insult their valor by suggesting they needed British command to save them from their own incompetence. We honor their sacrifice by telling the truth, that they fought brilliantly, died courageously, and won a great victory largely through their own blood and determination. Churchill sits down abruptly. The chamber explodes into chaos. Conservative MPs are pale, some outraged, others stunned. Labor members are applauding openly. The speaker calls for order multiple times before the noise subsides. In the gallery, American journalists are already phoning their editors. The headlines are writing themselves. Churchill defends U.S. forces, rebukes Montgomery. British PM, Battle of Bulge, an American victory. Churchill calls Montgomery claims grossly misleading. At SHAEF headquarters in Versailles, Eisenhower will receive the transcript within 3 hours. He'll read it twice, then send a short telegram to Churchill. Your statement has restored confidence in Allied unity. On behalf of American forces, thank you. At 12th Army Group headquarters, Bradley will read the transcript and quietly tear up his resignation letter. At 3rd Army headquarters, Patton will write in his diary, Churchill proved today he's a statesman, not just a politician. Monty proved he's a self-important ass. Thank God Britain has the Prime Minister and we're stuck with the Field Marshal. But here in Parliament, in this moment, what matters most is what Churchill has done. He sacrificed political capital with his own conservative base to defend American forces. He's contradicted his own military establishment to preserve alliance unity. He's risked backlash from British military leaders to tell an uncomfortable truth. And he's done it with 3 words that will define his leadership. Grossly misleading, not wrong, not false, not inaccurate, grossly misleading. A phrase that acknowledges Montgomery may have some factual basis while completely demolishing the interpretation he placed on those facts. It's masterful diplomacy, it's courageous leadership, and it saves the alliance at the moment it's closest to fracture. Because Churchill understands something Montgomery never grasped. In war, and especially in alliance warfare, how you say something matters as much as what you say. You can be technically correct and morally wrong. You can state facts and commit an offense. And you can claim credit you're entitled to in a way that destroys the trust you need to win. Montgomery was entitled to recognition for coordinating the northern sector, but claiming British forces saved disorganized Americans while those Americans were burying 70-time casualties wasn't claiming credit. It was claiming supremacy. And supremacy destroys partnerships. Churchill's parliamentary speech doesn't just correct Montgomery's narrative. It redefines leadership itself. Real leaders, Churchill demonstrates, are those willing to contradict their own side when pride threatens purpose. Real strength isn't defending your team right or wrong. Real strength is telling your team when they're wrong, especially when it costs you politically. The aftermath of Churchill's parliamentary speech unfolds rapidly. Within 24 hours, American newspapers run headlines that restore confidence in the alliance. The New York Times: Churchill honors American sacrifice at Bulge. The Washington Post: British PM rejects Montgomery's claims, defends U.S. forces. Even the Chicago Tribune, consistently skeptical of British leadership, prints a rare positive editorial. Prime Minister Churchill's courage in contradicting his own field marshal demonstrates the character that makes him worthy of American alliance. His defense of American forces against British arrogance will not be forgotten. January 19th. Montgomery, under intense pressure from Churchill and the British Chiefs of Staff, issues a proper clarification. It's nothing like his first weak attempt at apology. The role of British forces in the Battle of the Ardennes was important but relatively small compared to that of the United States forces. The battle was won primarily by the magnificent fighting qualities of the American soldier and by the teamwork of the Allies. I never intended to suggest otherwise, and I deeply regret any misunderstanding my earlier statement may have caused. It's too little, too late for many American officers, but it helps. Bradley withdraws his resignation threat officially. Patton stops demanding Montgomery's court-martial, though he never stops insulting him privately. January 20th. Eisenhower quietly completes the command reorganization he'd begun. American 1st and 9th Armies return to Bradley's exclusive command. Montgomery commands only British and Canadian forces for the remainder of the war. It's never announced as a demotion, but everyone understands what it means. Montgomery will command forces for 3 more months. He'll lead the crossing of the Rhine in the north. He'll accept the German surrender of forces in northern Germany in May 1945. But he never again commands American forces. Churchill and Eisenhower ensure that. The final statistics of the Battle of the Bulge tell the story more clearly than any press conference or parliamentary speech. American casualties, 80 to 9,000, including 19,000 dead. British casualties, 1,400. German casualties, 100,000. Divisions engaged. American 30 divisions across 3 armies. British 2 divisions in supporting role. Territory defended. American forces held both shoulders of the German penetration, defended the critical road junction at Bastogne, and drove the relief operation that broke the siege. Montgomery's contribution: coordination of 5 American divisions and 2 British divisions in the northern sector of the defensive operation. Competent and professional, but not decisive, and certainly not the difference between victory and defeat. The meaning of this moment extends far beyond the immediate crisis. Montgomery's press conference and Churchill's response illuminate a fundamental truth about leadership in coalition warfare. Ego is the enemy of victory. Montgomery was a brilliant tactician. His planning for Operation Overlord's ground campaign was meticulous. His pursuit across France after Normandy was professional. His coordination of the northern sector at the Bulge was competent. But his inability to share credit, his need to claim British superiority, his constitutional inability to acknowledge that American forces might succeed without British guidance, these character flaws nearly destroyed the alliance at its most critical moment. Churchill, by contrast, demonstrated what mature leadership looks like. He had every political incentive to defend Montgomery. His conservative base expected it. The British military establishment demanded it. Defending Britain's military honor against American criticism would have been the easy political choice. Instead, Churchill chose truth over politics, alliance over pride, and American honor over British ego. He sacrificed political capital to preserve strategic unity. He contradicted his own field marshal to defend forces that had bled beside British troops for 3 years, and he did it with 3 words that redefined leadership: grossly misleading. Eisenhower wrote in his memoirs years later, Churchill's parliamentary speech in January 1945 may have been his most important contribution to Allied victory. Not because of its military content, but because it reminded us why we were fighting together. Montgomery's press conference threatened to make us fight separately. Churchill's response ensured we stayed united. In war, that's the difference between victory and defeat. Bradley was more blunt in his autobiography. Churchill saved the alliance that January. If he'd defended Montgomery, if he'd tried to split the difference or engage in diplomatic double-talk, I would have resigned. Patton would have resigned. Half the American officer corps would have requested transfers to the Pacific. Instead, Churchill told the truth, defended American sacrifice, and proved that British leadership understood the value of American partnership. Even Montgomery, in his memoirs published years after the war, grudgingly acknowledged his mistake. My press conference of January 7, 1945, was mishandled. I spoke the truth as I saw it, but I failed to consider how my words would be received by American commanders who had just endured terrible casualties. Churchill was right to correct the public perception. The alliance was more important than any individual's claim to credit. That last sentence, "The alliance was more important than any individual's claim to credit," is perhaps the only moment of genuine wisdom in Montgomery's entire memoir regarding this incident. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last major offensive in the West. It cost Germany 100,000 casualties it couldn't replace, 600 tanks and assault guns it couldn't rebuild, and precious fuel it couldn't resupply. The German war machine broke in the Ardennes forests and never recovered, but it nearly broke something else: the Anglo-American alliance that had fought together from North Africa through Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and across France. For 11 days in January 1945, that alliance teetered. Officers threatened resignation. Newspapers printed editorials questioning continued partnership. Politicians calculated whether separate British and American commands might be preferable to the constant friction of coalition warfare. Then Winston Churchill stood before Parliament and spoke 3 words that changed everything. Grossly misleading. Not wrong, not false, not inaccurate, but grossly misleading. A phrase that acknowledged Montgomery might have some factual basis, while completely rejecting his interpretation and the offense it gave to American forces. With that phrase, Churchill sided with truth over loyalty, with alliance over pride, with American sacrifice over British ego. Montgomery commanded forces for 3 more months, accepting German surrender in May 1945. But he never commanded American forces again. Churchill ensured the alliance survived to win the war, proving that the strongest leaders are those willing to correct their own side when pride threatens purpose. When asked years later why he'd publicly contradicted Montgomery at such political cost, Churchill replied with characteristic directness, "Because the Americans were right. And in war, you don't sacrifice truth for comfort. You sacrifice comfort for truth." The alliance was built on trust. Montgomery's press conference violated that trust. "My duty was to restore it, whatever the political price." The alliance held, the war was won. And Churchill's choice in Parliament, to defend American forces at the expense of British pride, remains one of the most consequential acts of leadership in the Second World War. Not because it changed military strategy, not because it won battles, but because it saved the partnership that won the war. And that's a lesson that echoes beyond 1945, beyond World War II, into every coalition, every alliance, every partnership where success depends on trust. Ego is the enemy of victory. Pride is the enemy of partnership. And real leadership is knowing when to contradict your own side to preserve something more important, the unity that makes victory possible. If you found this story valuable, if you learned something about leadership, alliance, and the choices that shape history, then like this video, subscribe to Elite War Files, and drop a comment below. Tell us, do you think Churchill made the right choice, or should he have defended Montgomery? Your thoughts make this channel better. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.